Terror in Tandem's Octerrorfest. All month long, we'll be celebrating the horrifying delights of the spookiest month, October. Prepare yourself for episodes that frighten and delighten your spine, and we will chill you to the bone. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
Hi, good afternoon.
I feel like I struggle with that a lot.
You do,
I
all
put
the time.
different emphasis on different
Louise.
syllables.
I mean, the other intro, our regular intro, our non-October Terror Fest intro, you have gone to like elaborating on the...
I've really been Vincent pricing it up.
Yeah.
And
then this is like...
I struggled to speak.
Yeah. Because delightin' is
So I
not
thought,
a
why
word,
not start a
and I think it
podcast?
really bothers you.
What is?
Delightin'.
No, it's not that it...
And you're like, can I actually say this?
Oh,
Because I get upset
no,
because I don't
it's not
like
that
when
it bothers
people
me.
misuse
No, I know
words.
what it is. It's not that it bothers me. It's I'm just like I'm too English majory that like my brain automatically just stops itself, and it's like it has to. It automatically
Listener,
questions.
Is this not a reiteration what I just said, which is that it bothers you and you don't like when words are mispronounced?
But I don't feel bothered. It's just that my brain is sort of conditioned to come to a screeching goddamn halt whenever there's like wordplay.
Oh, well, that doesn't sound like a bother at all.
No. It's a delight. For you especially.
Delightin'.
Exactly. It's a delightening. It's the lovely.
I'm sorry that I just
like that song, The Lovely.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to be like, is that good that you feel that way? Because I'm pretty sure it's a word you're making up right now.
I think made up words are fine.
Sure.
Sometimes they
You just got to give me a
matter.
heads up on like what it means. Because sometimes context is not enough. I mean, if you're screaming it at me in pain and it's a made up word, then I can sort of suss it out.
What if I'm screaming at it in pleasure?
Again.
I'm screaming delight in me.
Delight
Delight in me. Gosh,
oh, goodness.
darn it.
Wow, this podcast is taking a turn, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, it is our anniversary weekend.
It is. I didn't know if you were going to bring that up.
Well, I did.
But ladies and gentlemen, we literally just came out of the woods where we were camping. And of course, because we're extremely wealthy, pampered people,
we have our own
massive yurt.
Yeah, glam site.
Set up like Kublai Khan.
Oh, yes. We have all the frond wavers.
It was like Xanadu, basically.
Yeah, there was so many people in the tent with us waving their fronds.
Our attendants.
And giving us grapes.
The
amount of grapes that I had.
So many grapes. And they do take time to peel. They do. It's just a lengthy process, no matter how many people you execute to motivate.
Speaking of executions, let's talk about what the topic of this episode is going to be for
Octerrorfest.
Right.
Yeah, we do have a specific topic in mind.
We do have a point to what we're doing today.
Yes, fear not, listener.
It's
Dracula. We're going to talk about Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
We previously did an episode that was very purposefully not Dracula. We wanted to talk about vampires that were anything but Dracula, but now
we're going to talk about vampires that are everything Dracula.
It's Dracula for days, ladies and gentlemen, or nights, to be more specific.
Correct.
We just want to talk about the endurance, the legend. He's not the original vampire, but
why don't you tell us how Dracula? Why don't you tell us, meaning me and Kitty, how Dracula came to be?
Sure. I mean, the Dracula that we know and love so much is, we should state, a wholly fictitious creation of the author Bram Stoker. However, Bram Stoker himself had his own inspirations. Now, the interesting thing about Dracula is the novel Dracula, as written by Bram Stoker, it's certainly the most enduring, but it's not the first vampire story. It's not even the first Western vampire novel. Actually, before I get into Dracula, I kind of want to talk about that for a second. So Dracula was published in 1897, and it really kicked off the craze. I mean, a lot of us had to read that in school. It's a classic.
Well, in college.
Yeah.
I don't think in high school.
In college, I think I was assigned it. I had definitely read it by that point anyway.
Yeah, same.
It's for real. It's an epistolary novel.
Do you want me to go into it? Because that's one of the top books that I have.
Do it.
So it's a Gothic novel.
Yes.
As Richard said, published in 1897.
I just pulled that straight from a brain juice, by the way.
That's good.
I didn't even research that.
I didn't either. I'm
nice.
This is all from my brain also. Because what the eyes read on the page go into your brain and out your mouth.
Perfect.
That's how learning works.
Is it? Huh. I just learned something, which now I know the process by which that happened.
So the long and short of it is, the short of it is that Bram Stoker tells the story of the fight against the vampire called Dracula in an epistolary novel.
Which is what?
It can be a variety of things. In this case, it's a series of letters, telegrams, journal entries, and newspaper articles written by the main characters.
It's basically a book that's like
a collection of letters or diary entries or notes.
And that's how the story unfolds. So I guess for...
and I'll go into
for
a little
modern
bit deeper
audience,
of the synopsis when I get to the top books of about Dracula.
An analog of that for someone that maybe isn't familiar with that kind of novel is like when you're playing a video game and you start collecting snippets of like audio logs or journal entries and you start to piece together a larger picture. That's how epistolary novels typically unfold, is the action and the plot, it sort of pieces together so that it really picks up the pace towards the end when things start to converge, because you're getting letters and journal entries not typically from the same person, especially in Dracula. These are coming from multiple people.
So some of the more, other epistolary novels, The Color Purple, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Society. So those are all told in the form of, sometimes they're love letters and diary entries. But in this case, it's like telegrams and newspaper
and
articles.
Carrie, also.
Yes,
Carrie, the novel, Stephen King.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to jump in, but
That's
I just
okay.
remembered that.
Right.
Yeah. But you'll agree, though, that there is a different pace to the way you learn things in an epistolary novel. It's more like you're solving a mystery in a way, because you're
you're putting together the pieces. Basically, you only know what the characters that are writing or communicating know.
And some of them could and often are completely full of shit.
Absolutely. It becomes, not necessarily an unreliable narrator. You could have many unreliables.
Yeah. Another example filmically, like Rashomon, which tells the same story from multiple points of view. And in that, you get very different versions of the same story.
And there's less dialogue in epistolary novels. There's more thoughts and emotions.
Which is true to form. Honestly, if there's a lot of dialogue in an epistolary novel, you start to wonder, like, what does this person just remember every single word that everyone says to them?
Unless it's like an audio recording.
True. Yeah, there are fun ways for authors, I think modern authors especially, to play with the format.
Text messages I've seen.
Yeah.
In a bunch.
Movies
books.
like Searching or Host or Unfriended that take place on computer screens and through Zoom meetings and things like that. It's sort of an extension of the epistolary form.
Well, this book that I just read takes place in 2014, I think, but it flashes back to 1986 through 89.
Yeah.
When nobody had like cell phones, because one of the issues in the story, if somebody had a cell phone, they would have been able to communicate.
Sure. I've noticed that a lot in modern horror is, having to add moments where the character noticeably loses service on their phone to take away that. And it's fine with me because cell phones are sort of a deus ex machina. Well, by the way, you mentioned the book you were reading, but you didn't mention what the book was.
Yeah, I'm not ready to talk about that.
Oh.
I might do it in a wrap-up.
All right.
of my
Neat.
hits and misses of the year.
Oh, this is
'Cause this might make it.
enticing. We're planting seeds,
Because it
listener.
has nothing to do with Dracula, and I don't want to send people. on
I
a
don't think anything we've said
non-Dracula
for a while has something to do with Dracula.
epistolary.
Yeah. We are, and that is a major
Anyway,
component.
the cell phone device is used sometimes to move the plot along, but also as a timing device to show the limitations of 25 years ago.
Exactly.
So it can be used both ways.
Exactly.
But there are no cell phones in Dracula stories.
No.
As far as I've
I
experienced.
think the most modern technology at that point was
Is a
probably
telegram?
the early telephone, but the one that in most modern usage would be the telegraph.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
It most like mass usage.
So why don't you tell us again, as we now went down that rabbit hole?
Wonderful rabbit hole. A bit about, so Bram Stoker largely based the character, and there's a bit of discussion in academia over the veracity of this, but I think it's largely accepted, at least publicly, that the inspiration for the character of Dracula, Count Dracula, is the very real Wallachian prince of the 15th century, Vlad Dracula, also known as Vlad
the
III.
Impaler.
Yes, and popularly known as Vlad the Impaler. So Vlad the Impaler, or Vlad III, was a Wallachian prince. Now, Wallachia is a region of Romania. Before Romania had the borders that it has now, it's even in my own lifetime, the borders of Romania have shifted and changed. It was like this, a lot of places in this time of the Middle Ages, it was broken up into baronies or duchies, Wallachia being one of them. So Vlad, what a life this guy had. He
impaled people.
Well, before that happened, he was given away by his father, Vlad Dracul, which means Vlad the Dragon, in Romanian or Wallachian, the dialect of that region. So Dracula literally just means son of the dragon. So Vlad Dracula was the son of the dragon. Vlad, the son of the dragon. That's a pretty dope nickname, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, Vlad
Son of the
itself
Dragon?
is a cool name, and then to tack son of the dragon at the end of it, it's like double whammy.
Do you know what's a better name?
What?
Mother of Dragons.
That is a great name. Great name. And they did her dirty at the end of that show.
Yeah.
I hope the books can do it right if they ever get written.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, George, take your vitamins and write. Anyway, keep that cholesterol healthy, George. Love you. Love you so much. You've changed my life. So, Vlad. Young Vlad, as a lad,
Was
lad,
clad in the robes of his...
Vlad the lad and his brother Radu were given away by his father to the Turks, the Ottomans of the Ottoman Empire, the Turks of the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan, as hostages to keep the peace. So Vlad was raised by the Ottomans. Now, he came back as a young man to Wallachia to defeat... This was after his father and another one of his brothers were executed by another boyar, who was just like a nobleman, like a landowner, basically.
boyard?
Boyar.
Boyar.
Yeah, it's what regions of like Bohemia.
Not Chef Boyardee.
No, boyar. So like regions of Bohemia and Hungary and places like that. That's what they were called. So in Japan, it might be known as a shogun or a baron in England.
Okay.
So that kind of thing. I think. I hope I'm not getting... History nerds, my apologies. I'm doing my best.
All the history nerds listening to this horror-themed podcast.
I'm doing my best.
This is fun. This is for fun.
It is for fun.
This isn't for
Don't rely on us for your papers.
Commentary.
Don't cite any of this. So he came back to his homeland to make war on everybody, basically, and he wasn't quite successful this time. He did it a second time, a little later after being exiled. He did better this time. He warred against the Sultan Mehmed II. Now, by this time, he had consolidated quite a bit of power, and he was at war with everybody from the Ottomans to his brother. Just a lot of war. And stories were being told about his cruelty. He was starting to become legendary for his cruelty at this point. And one of those things was his moniker, Vlad the Impaler, earned for the obvious reason of he impaled people. Now, in his second attempt at conquest of Wallachia, which he was successful at, he brazenly stormed the camp of the Sultan, Mehmed II, but he hit the wrong tent and killed a bunch of his retainers. So Mehmed was impressed by this. He pursued him, and what he found was a field, a forest, 15,000 impaled Turks, Bulgarian mercenaries, and whatnot, Ottomans. And according to the Greek historian Leonikos, I'm sorry, I'm not even going to try this man's last name. It's Greek, and I mean no disrespect, but I cannot pronounce it. Now, he said, in this man's words, this Greek historian Leonikos' words, the Sultan's army entered into the area of the impalements, which was 17 stades long and 7 stades wide. Now, that stade is an old Greek term. I did the math. That is a field of impaled bodies that is 8,755 feet wide by 3,605 feet long, or whatever. So that's the square footage of that. There were stakes there on which, as it was said, about 20,000 men, women, and children had been spitted. Quite a sight for the Turks and the Sultan himself. The Sultan was seized with amazement and said that it was not possible to deprive this country a man who had done such great deeds, who had such a diabolical understanding of how to govern his realm and its people. Blah, 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 blah. So the thing that strikes me about this story is the Sultan...
Yada, yada, yada. He came...
He yada, 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 killed 15,000 people, women and children. So what strikes me about this is the Sultan comes across 15,000 of his own countrymen brutalized in this way, and not all of them were dead, by the way. And what turns him back is not the horror of the spectacle, it's the awe of the will of and respect of the man who could do such a thing.
Yeah.
He looks at a field of impaled people and goes, now there's a guy that knows how to lead.
Yeah, I want that guy on my team.
Yeah, so honestly, he turns around and leaves. So Vlad has control of his area for a while, but he gets a lot of enemies for being a real motherfucker. A lot of stories are disseminated about him, and one of the reasons the legend of Vlad the Impaler is so enduring is that this also takes place about the same time that the printing press is invented.
Oh,
so people start making pamphlets and booklets and little, salacious stories. Some of them have elements of truth. Some of them are fabrications done by his enemies. This is the beginning of information warfare on a mass scale. We talked about this a little bit in an earlier episode, but it is very much understood that Vlad the Impaler was a real bastard. He was killed eventually in another war with the Ottomans. He was a real violent guy, but has a complicated legacy. But to some, he's a national hero. He united Wallachia. He ended an era of warring boyars by conquering and executing all of the boyars. So, he has a legacy, a bloody one.
So what better way to demystify this historical figure of darkness by creating this? To be quite honest,
it's a little less noble than that. To contemporaries and to historians, Bram Stoker didn't know a ton about Vlad the Impaler. It was most likely the legends and the moniker that made him say, hey, this is perfect.
Yeah, that's
I'm going to make my monster. It was
to
entirely...
make a creative spin.
Yes.
To demystify this story upon story.
Exactly.
Rumor upon rumor.
Exactly. What was so brilliant, what Bram Stoker did was he used his Victorian sensibilities and the style of the time to make a marriage of this historical figure and also the centuries of Slavic and Eastern European vampire tales. But Bram Stoker as I mentioned briefly, was not the first person to write about a vampire like this. And by this, I mean Count Dracula is a suave nobleman. He's Vlad. He is a former prince of Wallachia. So he's educated, he's handsome, he's sexy, and Bram Stoker writes him as, seductive. Mm-hmm. But he's not the first person to do that. The first account of a sort of white, westernized, suave, debonair vampire is from the 1819 novel, 1819 short story, The Vampire, with a Y, my favorite spelling.
Yep. Vampire.
Yeah, right. By John Polidori. Now, this comes out of the infamous writing contest of 1816 on Lake Geneva that took place between John Polidori, Percy Bysshe Shelley, Lord Byron, and Mary Godwin, who would later become Mary Shelley.
Now, she wrote Frankenstein. Is this when she wrote Frankenstein? This came out of that?
This is when she first pitched the idea for the modern Prometheus.
They're ghost stories. Who can tell the scariest?
Yes, this was the contest where they were all fucking and taking opium and writing and telling each other. No, that's exactly what happened.
I know, but
that's legit what happened. It sounds like if you were a wealthy Victorian with a brain, this was pre-Victorian. So if you were just a wealthy Brit with a brain, this is a rad way to party on Lake Geneva.
Yeah, beautiful.
So there were only 2 published works that came out of this, one being The Vampire and the other being Frankenstein.
Well, the third being the marriage certificate between
between
Percy
P.B. Shelley and Shelley Godwin.
Yeah.
And Mary Godwin, excuse me. Well, so in The Vampire, the main antagonist, the titular vampire, is Lord Ruthven, who's a suave, sexy nobleman, and he just sort of seduces a bunch of ladies and drains them. And it honestly, I did a little bit of research. I've never read it, and I haven't seen that it's been adapted very much. It has been adapted a bit, I think, by the BBC and whatnot, but there haven't been like movies. It's certainly not to the extent of Dracula. And we'll get into that a little bit later, but I think it's worth mentioning that although Bram Stoker is often credited with creating our modern interpretation of the vampire, he's not really the first person by any means to do so.
Huh. That's really interesting.
Yeah, so that's a little bit about Vlad the Impaler and Bram Stoker and the novel.
Well, why don't we take a break, and when we come back, I'll do my ratings.
Oh, I love it. Let's do it. Hello, I'm Connor Cochran. Over a century ago, my father, Connell, came to the beautiful town of Santa Mira from a simple life in Ireland as a druidic blood priest. With just a dream and an ancient pact with demons, my father was determined to bring the joyous celebration of Samhain to America with a line of spooky, silly, and just downright fun masks. Now, as many of you know, back in 1982, the original line of silver shamrock masks, when coupled with our famous ad jingle, may have slightly turned your children's heads into writhing piles of bugs. And that's on us. But that was my dad's company, and he's dead now. Today, I am proud to announce the return of Silver Shamrock's high-quality line of spooky Halloween masks, now virtually guaranteed to leave your head in largely about the same condition it was before, mostly. So come on down to Silver Shamrock. Sure, maybe we turned thousands of kids' heads into bugs that one time, but that was like 40 years ago, before we knew that kind of stuff was wrong. So sing it with me. The clock is ticking. It's almost time. Happy, happy Halloween, Silver. Oh my God. It's happening again. Shut it down! Shut it down! This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. Masks are fun, but they shouldn't turn your heads into bugs. Also, Halloween 3 Season of the Witch deserves a lot more love than it gets.
So I thought something fun that I could do would be to go through a lot of the film adaptations or
Okay.
representations of Dracula.
Of which there are more
There
than
are
a couple.
so many.
Yeah.
And I wanted to narrow them down for you all to explore them as you will.
Now, we're specifically talking Dracula, not
Yes.
other vampires,
Correct.
not...
It's just Dracula.
These are Draculas.
So I'm going to, subcategorize these to give you an idea of where these particular movies fall.
Now, are these personalized
They are
Florida categories?
personalized categories
Oh,
of
good.
my own.
TM pending.
So I'm not going to really make a commentary on
Laura's likes.
the quality of the movies or which one's my favorite
Can
until
I do that?
later. Yeah, when I talk about some of the recommendations, and
Okay.
I know that you'll have your top Dracula movies.
Oh,
so
do you think I'll have opinions? Is that a prediction?
yes.
Oh my God! Is it possible to hear eyes rolling? I wonder if the listener heard the eyes
I was
roll.
just turning my eyes to the camera.
It was amazing. I feel like it affected the tides.
So the first I'm going to start with is the problematic Dracula.
What do you mean by that?
So the movie is called Old Dracula from 1974.
I don't even know this one.
Yes.
Do I?
I mean, you're asking. I'm not sure why you're asking me if
I'm
you
not sure
know
either.
something.
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, Old Dracula
Okay.
was 1974.
That sounds like old Dracula. Remember him? God, what a guy.
I think it's also known as Vampira.
Okay.
And David Niven plays Count Dracula.
Oh, yes.
So the basic plot summary is it's about how Dracula wants to revive his bride with blood taken from supermodels, but in doing so turns her into a black woman. And later, David Niven dons blackface. So
David Niven, famously not a black man.
No.
Yes.
So that's why it's problematic. This is a problematic representation.
So this is like the Song of the South
anybody
of
but
Dracula movies?
Dracula, right.
Jesus Christ.
I know.
I swear I've never... I remember hearing about the David Niven blackface thing, but I've never heard of the movie title.
Yes.
So I guess it's been sort of buried a bit.
Mm-hmm. Don't bother.
Yeah, doesn't sound worth it.
Don't buy.
Good Lord.
So now I'm going to go into the more saucy
Problematic
characters.
vampire.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, kudos for the deep dive. That's an interesting
just one
find.
to avoid.
Yeah.
And
Jesus.
you can watch these next ones or
Hey,
not.
you know what? Can I actually make a quick suggestion?
Sure.
Instead of watching, what was that, old grandpa vampires?
Yeah.
Instead of
Dracula.
watching Blackface Vampire, watch Ganja and Hess or watch Blackula.
Yeah.
Just go there. They're awesome. They're both fantastic movies.
Not problematic.
Yeah. Starring,
Blackula.
like legit movies. Just watch those.
So
Especially Ganja and Hess. Oh my God.
some of the hottest vampires.
Okay.
Dracula
All right.
representations.
I might have contributions to this.
Well, you can or not. I don't care. So here are the sexiest, hottest representations of Dracula.
Swollest Dracula.
Yeah, the he can get it.
Okay. I'm pretty sure I know at least one entry on this list.
The first I'm going to mention is Gerard Butler.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Dracula 2000 from the year 2000.
Yeah, that was like a real rad time, Y2K. Johnny Lee Miller was in that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the synopsis is about a group of bank robbers. I'm not recommending this movie.
It's okay.
I'm not recommending any of these movies, really.
If it's on and you watch it, there are worse ways to spend your day.
But if you want to see young, hot Gerard Butler being mopey and depressed.
And for Gen Z, if you want to see what your parents were watching,
maybe.
Yeah.
So this is about a group of bank robbers who crack a vault in London and find a coffin inside. And then they take that coffin to Louisiana, New Orleans,
as you
specifically.
do. Sure.
And then it's Dracula inside.
Yeah.
But he also is Judas Iscariot.
Yeah, definitely.
So he wreaks havoc all across Louisiana.
Oh, so is this the writer's room? Andy's Judas, man. Andy, so we're in New Orleans, and it's Judas, and
It gets more convoluted.
Oh my God! I mean, why not?
So he's on the hunt for Mary Van Helsing, who is a descendant of Abraham Van Helsing. And then another descendant of Van Helsing, played by Christopher Plummer, plays Matthew Van Helsing, who is kept him drained of blood to keep him I don't know, calm.
Is that like the only way to? Okay, sure, yeah.
He's been keeping him
at this
drained of
point.
blood.
I feel like asking questions is just pointless. Just go with it.
And so he keeps him drained of blood to keep him trapped in this coffin.
All right.
And now
Gotta have
Matthew
a hobby.
Van Helsing is trying to track these robbers down to get an understanding of where is Count Dracula.
There's a lot of Van Helsings.
Yeah, not like descendants of.
Yeah.
So listen, maybe not for the plot, maybe watch for the hot.
Yeah. Yeah, there are some very attractive people in that movie. I remember when it came out, it was like, it was younger Dracula. It was, I think, a little bit away from like the John Carradine, Bela Lugosi, like old vampire.
I feel like it was one of the first emergence of the sexy vampire.
Yeah, sure.
So Dominic Purcell is my next hottest.
Interesting choice. Yeah.
In Blade 3, Trinity.
I would say
in 2004.
Known by all the fans as the best one.
It's the third Blade movie.
The one everyone loves.
And Blade must fight against Dracula, also known as Drake, played by the leather pants Dominic Purcell.
Yeah, he's swollen this one.
Dominic Purcell notoriously is from Prison Break.
And Legends of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess, I mean, if you don't know who Gerard Butler is, he was in 300, all of the Has Fallen movies.
Yeah. This particular place has fallen.
Yeah.
I've fallen.
And apparently
and can't
Louisiana has fallen under his Dracula.
Yeah.
But back to Dominic Purcell.
A lot of Gerard Butler's career has been centered around knocking things over.
Yes.
Yeah.
He doesn't build stuff.
He knocks stuff over.
Yeah, I know, but shouldn't we make Gerard Butler build something now?
Oh, interesting. Well, you're really flipping the script there.
So
I don't know. We'll see if he's up to the challenge.
Dominic Purcell and his Blade 3 movie.
In your court, Gerard.
So
your move.
So Parker Posey is like the vampire leader in
She's
this movie.
quite something in this movie. I love Parker Posey.
She's the mockumentary queen.
No, she's fantastic.
But she's in, she plays the lead vampire.
And she really goes for it.
She basically has been framing Blade for murders for years and years and years, and sets him to get caught by the FBI. So that's the plot line there, while Drake, Dominic Purcell is...
Count Dracula?
Yeah, Count Dracula. And then the third hottest, which also might be the first hottest.
Wait, Ryan Reynolds is in that movie, and he goes full abs in that one. So, give it up.
But he doesn't play Count Dracula.
No, but he is in it. He's Hannibal King.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the hottest.
Are we just not talking about every hot man in that movie?
No, I'm just
talking
about the
Wesley.
hottest
Wesley,
Dracula,
I was going to give it up to you, but...
Remember, this is
you're
Dracula.
Right. You're right. It's not the Daywalker.
Vampires. We already talked about vampires.
We did.
So the next hottest is Luke Evans in Dracula Untold from 2014.
Yes. Which was originally supposed to be the entryway into the now defunct dark universe that was going to be all connected with Russell Crowe as like Dr. Jekyll running the strings. It was going to be like their Marvel universe. They tried it with The Mummy with Tom Cruise, but it was going to kick off with Luke Evans.
Well, he is
the movie wasn't that good.
Lots of things. Fast and Furious.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Girl on the Train, Beauty and the Beast. He played
he was
in
in
live
Ma.
action. He played Gaston. 9 Perfect Strangers.
Ma, remember?
Ma, yep, remember. And so he's. Let me tell you the plot to this, because this is interesting.
Yeah.
So the premise is that Charles Dance, aka Tywin Lannister,
yeah, love him,
would give his head superior vampire powers to Luke Evans, Vlad Dracula, which you mentioned earlier. So Luke Evans' character is Vlad Dracula, and so Tywin says, "I'll give you my juice."
Yeah.
For 3 days to fight off the Turks.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to resist drinking human blood during that time. And then if you do, you'll go back exactly as you are now. If you don't, then I'll be free.
Hooray.
So guess what happens?
He drinks human blood.
He drinks human blood.
Yeah, I've seen it. It's a very action-oriented take on the story.
Yeah. Well,
And,
then
like,
basically Tywin leaves the cave and nothing happens. And then flash forward 500 years later where Vlad, played by Luke Evans, and now he's full-on Dracula. He has now embraced that moniker. He runs into the reincarnation of his dead wife in a flower market, and they stroll off happily ever after.
Yeah.
And Tywin follows them and off-screen mutters, "Let the games begin."
Oh my God, that's amazing. I forgot that part. I forgot a lot of that movie, to be honest, which I think is why they tried it again with The Mummy with Tom Cruise, which I haven't seen, so I won't judge it. But let's just say the Dark Universe, which was going to originally have Angelina Jolie as the Bride of Frankenstein. It was going to have Johnny Depp as the Invisible Man. Yeah.
I bet you Johnny Depp wishes.
Russell, right. That would have come in handy at certain points, I guess. No, he honestly, he doesn't seem to be a man interested in invisibility. He seems to be as open as possible, public as possible to, oh God, enough. Like I know, we all know enough. So yeah, hot Luke Evans.
Hot.
Look at them nips. I mean, they're in the movie.
Now on to the creepiest.
Is it me?
Perfect. No, but that comment sure
Jesus.
gave you some
Welcome to
fuel.
Exposing Thyself.
So the creepiest, I have two. We'll start with Klaus Kinski.
Oh, excellent. Of course.
From Nosferatu the Vampire.
Oh, I thought you meant literally just Klaus Kinski.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
In 1979,
Directed
he
by
is
Sigrid
in
Werner.
F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu, written and directed by Werner Herzog.
Well, it's a remake of F.W.
Yes.
Murnau's. Yes.
Yep, an adaptation.
Yeah.
Adaptation.
Yeah.
Um.
And Isabella Gianni is in it.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh gosh, from Possession.
We
Sorry.
are not talking about hottest.
I know,
anymore.
but Isabella Gianni should be mentioned always. She's a masterful actor, and yes. Anyway,
Back to creepy. Kinski plays Count Orlok. And he's like pitiful and sniffly and sickly and
hideous looking.
Yes. And he's stuck in a dark, dank castle. And he's got this bulbous head and this gray skin and these front fangs that make him look like a tick.
Yeah. So basically, it took about 15 minutes in the makeup tent to make Klaus Kinski look like that.
And he's got like stuffy nose voice and it makes him sound sick, which is a good pairing because basically Herzog's representation in this movie, like his direction in this movie, is that vampirism appears contagious.
Yes.
It is like a disease, and because the vampire is infected, that he can be an infector. So like he's the infector, so he has to be like,
and especially in the opening of the movie, it's juxtaposed with scenes of pestilence.
Yes.
Like burning bodies in villages that have been ravaged by plague, and just all the ugliness that goes along with that. That's really pervasive in the grimy decay that's in the film.
and like what it sort of does to consume blood in this way. The other creepiest.
Well, I want to mention, you called him Count Orlok. There's a very specific reason he's Count Orlok. In the 1922 version that F.W. Murnau, the silent German version starring Max Schreck as Count Orlok, that's a fantastic movie too. Watch that. It's very good. And it's still very creepy. The reason they had to call him Count Orlok and not Count Dracula is because there was a dispute with the Stoker estate. They would not license the name. That was not done until 1931's Todd Browning version starring Bela Lugosi, where they were allowed to finally call him Dracula. But the estate in 1922 said no, so they just said, all right, fine, he's fucking Count Orlok. Great, he sucks blood, blah, blah, blah. You didn't invent vampires, so we'll just call him something else.
Right.
But they did keep a lot of the tropes that Stoker had established, like the consecrated earth and, the coming to England and the reincarnation of an old lover and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my next creepiest is Willem Dafoe in Shadow of the Vampire from 2000.
Sensing a theme here.
Hideous.
Yes.
Creepy.
Well, also all based around Max Schreck.
Yes. So, directed by Elias Merhange.
I believe you.
Merhige.
Okay.
It also stars John Malkovich playing F.W. Murnau.
Yes. It's a fictionalization of
It's
the
meta.
shooting of that film.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's very good.
And Willem Dafoe is Max Schreck. So the leading actor, who it turns out isn't pretending to be a vampire for the camera, he actually is a vampire.
That's the conceit of the film is, what if Max Schreck, the star of this film, was a vampire? And it's at a certain point, F.W. Murnau learns this.
Oh, yeah, he knows. And
yeah.
he's got everybody believing that Max Schreck is just method. He's method.
It gets very dark humor element. And Willem Dafoe is obviously perfect.
He got an Oscar nomination for it.
He should have won the Oscar for it. I mean, he was magnificent in this role. And honestly, no matter how small the role is, that man seems to just lose himself in it. He really, really launches himself into the part. And he plays Nosferatu so deliciously, and like a vampire who sort of discovered this new modern way to hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
He definitely should have won, considering who did win.
Who won that year?
Kevin Spacey.
Oh,
for
gosh.
American Beauty.
Oh, God, even worse. Why did anyone think that movie was good? It was so creepy. It was outwardly creepy.
Speaking of creepy.
That was the whole movie. Every character in that movie was creepy, and we're like, "Oh my God, brilliant! Give it Oscars." God, what's wrong with everybody? Whew, I'm sorry.
I know. Anyway, so Willem Dafoe, like I said, it's the whole film essentially is an allegory of exploitation done with the excuse of genius. And, this director's just trying to get a masterpiece, trying to get an Oscar winner.
It's great to watch John Malkovich with his nervous energy playing the director who throughout the film is more and more morally compromising himself to get this fucking project finished.
Yeah.
And it's a bit of a parody on the pressures of the Hollywood or the film system of, the sacrifices one might make in the creative process.
Absolutely.
It's really good. It's a good time. And honestly, quite grisly.
My last category is the perfectly cast Dracula.
Great.
I have two.
I'd love them.
The first is Christopher Lee from Horror of Dracula and The Satanic Rites of Dracula.
And like 15 other Dracula
Sure.
movies for sure. Yeah. And also, ladies and gents, my personal favorite.
Yes. I mean, Christopher Lee is in the original Hammer horror movie Dracula.
Which, was it
directed by Terrence Fisher.
Was it 1954 that movie came out, I think? That was...
starring Peter Cushing as Van
Helsing, Christopher Lee as Count Dracula. That was the revitalization of the Universal film. So the 1931 Bela Lugosi version, Bela Lugosi is this like middle-aged Slavic guy who has this very Svengali look. And then, fast forward 25 years later, they sort of reboot it with Hammer Horror, this scrappy English studio, and they cast this suave, tall, beautiful, young Christopher Lee, who plays a very sensual version of Count Dracula in this movie. And it is quite an update. And I would argue...
it makes its own story.
Much closer to the version of the novel, who is kind of a sex monster.
It's super gory.
Yeah, it is.
And scary. And Christopher Lee plays it like as really imposing, and his mouth is always dripping with blood.
Yes.
Like he's like a messy vampire, as you would think.
He's a monster.
Yeah.
Yes, but he's
handsome, but not in the way that distracts you from how much of a monster
in
he
the
is.
way
It's
you
not
might,
like excusable, you
in
know?
the way you might picture John Milton's Lucifer. He's beautiful, but he's a monster.
He's like elegant and charming enough, but also terrifying that you
imposing,
are very uncomfortable.
Yes, he commands the room, and boy, perfectly cast indeed. Because Christopher Lee, the man himself, had that presence of entering a room, and that was born of years of. I mean, he was a very well-educated, well-read, brilliant man, and a world traveler. I think it came from a lifetime of experience and the character of the man himself. But he'd entered a room, and God, I feel like it was just electric.
And now we move to present day. The current show Dracula.
Okay.
From 2020 to present, starring Claes Bang.
Oh yeah, the BBC show, right?
Yes. So, Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat created
of Doctor Who,
BBC's Dracula series
and Sherlock fame.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's super grisly and really disturbing. And Claes Bang from Bad Sisters, which I just watched on Apple TV, and it's amazing. He plays one of the lead characters. Oh my God, he's so good. But in this iteration of Count Dracula, he's really creepy, but he's like also funny and a little sarcastic and playful and charming.
Was he the shitty husband in that show?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes.
Oh, he's very good.
So he has really dark black eyes. I know. He has really dark black eyes, and he's got like this very like steely aristocratic face.
Yeah. And
they make him look evil. These features make him look evil, especially when he like clenches his jaw. The thing about this production is that it represents Dracula as literal Satan. It emphasizes a lot of religious backdrop, and it's really, there's a lot of nuns. It's very disgusting and terrifying.
I've not watched it, but you're really kind of making me want to.
And Bang's fangs are a full mouth of jagged, sharp teeth, which is always scary.
Yeah, when they go full monster with that, I do appreciate that they did not do that with Christopher Lee. I mean, we're describing him as an imposing figure, but his fangs were neat.
Right.
He had the two fangs. But when they do the full mouth, like I'm a full-on Strigoi monster, that's a choice, and I do appreciate that sometimes.
Yeah.
Reminding the viewer that this is not, don't be sympathetic with this thing.
Because it is a BBC show, I'm not sure where people can watch it, but
I think it was on Netflix for a while, but I don't know.
I'm just showing Richard a picture.
Yeah.
Look at
them's teeth.
The eyes, too.
Yeah, that's him, the husband. Oh, man, that guy creeped me the hell out.
He's so good. He's so good.
Oh, we might have to check this out.
Yeah, I think he's an actor that you'll love to hate because he does such a good job of being so hateful.
Oh, God. Some of my favorite actors are like that, though. The ones that can really embody that wonderful. And then in real life, they always turn out to be like super softies.
Yeah, right.
And it's adorable.
So then, now that I've gone through that, do you want to talk any more about any movies that I didn't mention?
Yeah,
because I'm going to next go on to some books and just a couple of TV shows that I wanted to recommend.
I'll mention a couple movies, but I won't linger too much because you've already mentioned a few. Both versions of Nosferatu, both Max Schreck and Klaus Kinski play masterful versions of this vampire. Both F.W. Murnau and Werner Herzog direct two very different but incredible movies. I would say Herzog's is a little closer to the novel, but they're both very much their own thing. I want to mention Udo Kier, who horror fans would know from lots of different projects, but probably from Suspiria. He was in Blade, the first one with Stephen Dorff.
Right.
It's such a good movie.
And,
My God.
and Stephen
Norrington
Dorff
directed.
in the 3rd season of True Detective.
I love Stephen Dorff.
Is amazing.
I mean, young Stephen Dorff in The Gate was one of the first movies that ever truly scared me as a kid. So, Stephen Dorff, man, shout out.
Dorff it up.
We know you listen. And I want to give a particular shout out. This movie can be a bit divisive amongst some. I will go to my grave loving
Go to your coffin?
movie. Yes. I love this movie so much. I've seen it a dozen times. I'm talking 1992's Francis Ford Coppola directed Bram Stoker's Dracula, starring Gary Oldman as Dracula. Now, this is an interestingly cast movie. We've got Winona Ryder as Mina Harker, Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker. We have, in my opinion, the greatest interpretation of Renfield ever, played by Tom Waits.
Hot Lucy.
I don't know the actor's name, and I'm sorry, but Lucy Westinghouse is quite something in this movie. Carrie Elways, Richard E. Grant. It's an amazing cast. So Gary Oldman plays both versions of Dracula. He plays the old, decrepit monster, and then when he discovers Mina, he becomes reinvigorated. He youthens and becomes the sexy young Dracula. And while this movie does adhere to a lot of the book in a lot of ways, it really plays up the romance between Mina and Dracula.
You said Mina Harker.
Harker.
No.
Oh,
Mina
she's
Murray.
not Harker. You're right. She's engaged to be wed to Jonathan Harker.
Sadie Frost plays Lucy, and
right.
she is a looker.
Oh, she's an absolute gorgeous woman, and in this movie, it was 1992. I was of an age, and yes, it had an impression. Thank you, Sadie. So anyway, it's a very indulgent film. It makes a lot of choices, but it's a Francis Ford Coppola film. It's got a big budget. It really goes for it. It makes some stylistic choices that people have argued about that I find delightful and fantastic. I mean,
I like when he slithers.
He wears sunglasses. Yeah.
He when he's old and gross.
They do make, and it's Gary Oldman, so he
and
plays
also
the
the
shit
castle
out of this role.
Is very like
It really is.
the whole ride.
The ride against the sunrise at the end is amazing. It's very.
But even Keanu's ride there.
Yes.
He doesn't know what's going on.
Yes.
I mean, Keanu does a really good job of playing.
He was lambasted for that. This
innocent. I mean, that's what the whole
before
book is
the
about.
Keanu-sans happened. Keanu Reeves was lambasted for his acting in this movie as being, dull and wooden. But I would argue a man who's being held against his will and drained nightly by the concubines of Dracula would probably not act very enthusiastically. I love Keanu Reeves. I've always loved Keanu Reeves ever since Bill and Ted, and ever since was that movie with Kevin Kline? I Love You to Death.
Oh yeah.
And Parenthood.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I love this version of the movie. It's a great version. It's quite complete. It tells the story. It really sexes it up for sure, but it's also violent and it's cast to the nines. Anthony Hopkins plays Dr. Van Helsing, and he really plays this role.
Yeah.
Like there's almost a comedic element to it in that it's borderline campy, but it's also quite scary. It's got good special effects, amazing costumes. Can't go wrong. 1992, Bram Stoker's. Also, a young Monica Bellucci plays one of Dracula's concubines, and I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
So quick shout outs to a few other Draculas out there, because there are very many. Obviously, we have Bela Lugosi and his eyebrows.
Yeah.
Playing this Svengali, mesmerizing Dracula, but also very much the foreigner. He's Eastern European. He's Slavic, and his accent does not hide that. So he's very much played with that sort of British xenophobia.
Yep.
We have George Hamilton playing Dracula in Love at First Bite. The late great John Carradine playing Dracula in a number of properties, including Billy the Kid versus Dracula, which may be one of the worst movies ever made. Got Frank Langella, Jack Palance. And I am going to mention this in a future episode, but there is Carlos Villarreal, who played Dracula in the 1931 Mexican production of Dracula, which was shot simultaneously with the American production. I'm going to talk about that in another episode.
Our international
upcoming.
Episode? Yes.
But listen, it's one of those roles. It's been played and played and played again. And a quick shout out, although it's a slight cheat, because he does not play Dracula. But I do want to mention, we mentioned before Blackula. I want to give a shout out to William Marshall, who plays Prince Mamuwalde, who in the flashbacks in the movie, goes to Dracula as a ruler of Wallachia to ask for his help. He's a prince of Africa, and he's asking for his help to end the slave trade. And Dracula betrays him, turns him, puts him in a coffin. That coffin gets bought up years later and sent to Los Angeles, and then he gets unleashed and all that shit.
Yeah,
it's actually quite a poignant film. It's a mixture of blaxploitation of the 70s, so that kind of that funky style of action and jive and whatnot. Just that very very much of its time and place. Los Angeles in the 70s. And there's definitely, it does not shy away from the racial tensions and just the very horrifying act of asking for help for this and being punished for it. It's another creation of, while this vampire is a monster that feeds on the living, there is a sympathy to him.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, Blackula, and then the sequel Scream, Blackula Scream.
There are so many options of films, and I also want to give you a few other options, not films.
Do it.
So I'm going to start with the books. We've already talked about Bram Stoker's novel,
of course,
Dracula,
and it is worth a read. It's great.
Published in 1897, as you mentioned earlier.
It's quite scary.
Epistolary novel. The English solicitor named Jonathan Harker travels to help Count Dracula with legal matters concerning his immigration to London. And he's charmed by Dracula. He takes him in. And then, as you mentioned, he's trapped in the castle.
And the reason
the 3 female vampires there seduce and drink his blood before Dracula stops them and is like, I need him.
The reason they send
to make me
Jonathan in the first place is because the person they sent before him, Renfield, went insane.
Yes.
And now is in an asylum.
And the book itself, it's very gothic. It explores good versus evil. It illuminates relationship between religion and reason, the East and West, modern versus old world. It has
some of terrifying scenes, such as the Voyage of the Demeter.
Yeah.
Which is, I believe, it's been in the works for almost 2 decades now, but I believe is finally moving forward as an actual production.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can't wait.
And this has been, an inspiration for a lot of representations of what we talked about
For
today.
sure. It's the source. And it's not like an old dusty, you gotta read this for completionist's sake. It's legit good.
Yeah.
It's entertaining. Even in 2022, this century-old novel is a thrilling read.
Just as, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Oh, gosh, I might go to bat with that. That's a bit more of a slog. That one can be a bit tough to read, I think.
Another recommendation for books,
I just got to look.
Is called Dracula, which is written by Dacre Stoker, who's the great-grandnephew of Bram Stoker. So it's co-written by him. And young Bram Stoker is the main character. So this is designed to be a prequel to Dracula, inspired by notes and texts left behind by the author of the original novel. And it's a supernatural thriller that reveals not only Dracula's true origins, but Bram Stoker's reasoning for telling the tale that he told. And so it says the book is sickly Bram spending his early days bedridden in his parents' Dublin home. there's a string of mysterious deaths that occur in a nearby town, and Bram and his sister Matilda figure out the pattern behind these murders. And then Ellen, his caretaker, suddenly vanishes. And years later, his sister returns from studying in Paris to tell him that she saw Ellen.
Imagine.
And that the nightmare that they thought was over is like still only started. And so it's 1868. And so then like now 21-year-old Bram Stoker basically is fighting this evil. He has crucifixes, holy water, a rifle. He is trying to survive this night, the longest night of his life.
That sounds pretty rad, actually.
Yeah.
I've
and
not
so he
read
writes
it, but
down all these events that happen.
Yeah.
So that
I've seen this done with Edgar Allan Poe a few times.
That is what is said to have created Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Like Alan Moore did that with From Hell.
Oh,
that
right.
kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds actually really neat. I have not read that, but I might give it a shot.
And the last book is called The Historian by Elizabeth Kostova.
Okay.
And the plot blends both history and folklore of Vlad, the Impaler, and his fictional equivalent, Count Dracula. In 1972, the book takes place when a 16-year-old American living in Amsterdam finds a mysterious book in her father's library. And the book is an ancient and is old, really old, and blank, completely blank, except for a woodcut of a dragon and the word Dracula.
Nice.
Spelled with a Y.
Son of the dragon.
And there are a bunch of letters tucked inside, dated 1930 and addressed to my dear and unfortunate successor. And then it drives her curiosity. So she really wants to do research. And her widowed father reluctantly starts telling her the story.
Oh, my God.
And he's like, well, you have to be really careful when doing research because a former colleague of mine became obsessed and had since disappeared. And there was another person I was working with that has had, I haven't been able to hear from. And so she starts her own research.
What you're describing right now is my ultimate fantasy, that a relative will pass and I will be going through their things and like just depending on the relative, just you can end my fantasy there. But like a fucking like a book will fall off a shelf and a piece of paper will fly out and then thus begins a great journey.
Yes.
And like I find out all these weird things.
You think so, but I would rather find it in your family's library. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I guess.
Like I don't want
have
to
the
find
emotional
it in my own
attachment
family
to it.
library.
Yeah. Oh, you and I are both reaching that age where our elders are confiding in us things that I just wish they'd take to their graves.
Sometimes,
Yeah,
but sometimes I don't mind.
I just like, you know what?
You get too emotionally wrapped up. I'm more like, wow,
what a
really?
complicated web you've woven.
Wish I knew this before.
I lead a very anodyne life. Let's just say, put it that way. And I'm fine with that. I think that's great.
So just my quick final TV show, Castlevania, which is an animated series.
Which fucking rules.
It's a vampire hunter that fights to save a city from an army of otherworldly creatures controlled by Dracula. And it stars Richard Armitage and James Callis, who is otherwise known as Gaius Baltar.
Battlestar, baby. It's so
It
good.
also stars Theo James from the Divergent Insurgent
It's
series.
got a great voice cast.
Series.
What's his name? Graham McTavish is in it as well as Count Dracula.
Yep.
It is so... Warren Ellis is a problematic figure in the world of comics, but I think if we separate issues around his personality, it's hard to deny that he is an incredible writer, and he does write these episodes. These are cartoons for adults. They're fantastic.
Well, the art, the visual,
unbelievable. The action is incredible. The writing's incredible. It's just there's nothing bad about them.
It has that sort of polished, artistic flair of the animated Batman that we used to watch.
It gets bleak, but things wrap up It's a rare show that
Was it Justice League?
ends
Which one am I thinking?
Maybe it ends as well as it began, meaning like you can fully invest in this show and be comforted in the knowledge that you'll be happy at the end of it.
Right.
It's just well done.
And then the other one that I mentioned.
I just went nuts on that. I just loved it so
okay.
much. I did.
The BBC Dracula that I've already talked about.
For sure. Yeah, with Claes?
Claes?
It's
Claes Bang.
Claes, right? Yes.
Claes Bang.
Yeah. I think that the British Isles have very interesting spellings and pronunciations sometimes.
So that's
to us Americans.
That's our Octerrorfest Dracula episode,
Listen,
everyone.
Quick mention to an upcoming project that I don't know a ton about.
Already. This seems like a very...
We're talking about the upcoming film Renfield, starring Nicholas Hoult as Renfield.
Right.
Supposedly from his point of view. We love Nicholas Hoult around here. Always, we've been Nicholas Hoult fans since about a boy. Whatever. But Nicolas Cage is playing Count Dracula, and ladies and gentlemen, I don't know if I've mentioned my deep love for Nicolas Cage, but I can't wait.
Yeah.
I can't wait. Nicolas Cage has already played in the vampire world. As we know, I'm a vampire. But I can't wait to see him as Count Dracula. I don't care what he does with it. I just want to see what he does with it. So that's it. Sorry.
No, that's great. And thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our Octerrorfest theme and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you do, we promise not to haunt you.